Man, I want to do all these things, but I just don't have the time. How many of you have thought that? Put your hand up if you've thought of that. Okay, I can't see you, but I'm assuming if you're watching this video, you have your hand up. If not physically, at least mentally. This is something that I've always dealt with. This feeling of having multiple hobbies or multiple interests and wanting to do everything under the sun, trying to fit things into my calendar, trying to make it all work. But then you look at your calendar at the end of the week and you're like, my week felt so busy, but I didn't actually get anything done. Why is that? Simply put, it's because you're trying to do too many things at once. You're all over the place and you're just not focused. So what is the solution to this? That's what we're going to cover today. In today's video, we're going to go through the exact steps that I took and the steps that you can take as well in order to plan your life and structure it so that you can stop feeling so overwhelmed and so that you can actually get what you want to get done. So let's jump in. So the first step here is to create your list of essentials. And mine is actually right, I think there, if I'm pointing to it correctly. But this is called a essentialism list because what is on here are the bare essentials that you absolutely need. If there's nothing critical, do not put it on this list. When making this list, you want to follow the concept of less is more, because the more things you have on this list, the more your time, attention, and energy are going to be split. And you don't want that. If you want to make progress in something, keep this list as small as possible and you won't burn yourself out trying to do a billion different things at once. Hi, future me here. In this part of the video, I was going to show you guys my essentialism list so you guys can base yours off of it. But mine has changed recently. So I'm going to read out the new essentialism list that I have. So my categories are health, work, relationships. And under these categories, I have subcategories. So for health, I have physical activity, sleep, and nutrition. So basically just sleep, exercise, and diet. You'd be amazed at how many things you can get done if you just nail those three things. And then under work, I have content / YouTube, which is under business / purpose. And then something to make money. So for most people, including myself, this would be like your job. And then under relationships, I have family / mom, high quality friends, and then also myself. So I'll put my old list here as well. You can pause the video if you want to see it, as well as the changes that I've made as I've kind of iterated through this process. And I encourage you to do the same as well when you're creating your own list. Create it, reference it, and then revisit it every now and then to make sure that it's still accurate to your life and your priorities. I also learned this from Hamza, and I'll throw his list down here as well for context. He's a self-improvement YouTuber. So you have a bunch of stuff here to base your list off of if you want to like start somewhere or have like a template. That being said, let's go back to why this list is important. So the important part about this list right here is that this is what allows you to say no to things. If somebody invites you to something, or if you get an opportunity to do something and it doesn't fall into one of the categories on this list, then you have to say no. And I come back to this list over and over and over again when making decisions and trying to prioritize my life, because if I'm doing something and it's not on the list, then I shouldn't be doing it because it's not essential to my life. Like, that's the entire point of the list. So make the list, refer back to it time and time again, and it will help you make decisions and stay focused. Once you have this list, let's move on to the next step. The next step is to pick one thing to focus on. Now, I know what you're going to say. I know what you're going to say. You're going to say, I can't pick one thing to focus on. I have to do all these things at the same time, because that's the exact thought that I had when I first started this whole thing. And it's going to be hard. It's going to be really, really hard, but you have to decide between making significant progress in one thing or making really small progress in a bunch of different things. And there's a really good diagram for this from the book Essentialism that I'll throw up here to kind of explain this, because if you focus all your attention and energy on one thing, you're gonna make significant progress in it. It's like the big arrow, but if you don't, it's like all the little arrows, right? If you go this route with all the little arrows, the progress that you make is so small. It's so slow. Like, I'm a pretty impatient person. And if you're impatient like me and you actually want to make significant progress in certain areas of your life, then it's really, really important. Like, I cannot emphasize how important it is that you pick one thing to focus on, because if you don't, your attention is going to be split and you're not going to make significant progress in this one thing. So it's important you pick one thing. And the added benefit to this, like the side perk that you get, which is really powerful, is your background processes are going to think about this one thing unconsciously. It's not going to require any effort. So what am I talking about here? If you choose to focus on one thing, all your thoughts are around this one thing. You start having crazy ideas just out of nowhere as you're making your breakfast or your dinner. You start having it when you're brushing your teeth. You start having ideas before you go to sleep. It's a really awesome perk to have because it helps you make progress faster. So that's a summary for this section. You have to pick one thing to focus on. Now your next question here is probably how? How do I pick the one thing? It's hard, right? I'll tell you how. But in order to do this, we're gonna have to go through a concept called the theory of constraints. The theory of constraints is a pretty easy concept to understand, and it's commonly described using a ladder analogy. So let's say you want to build a ladder to make progress in the things you want to make progress in. You can build the sides or you can build the rung. And too often, we only focus on building the sides of the ladder. And as you can imagine, you cannot climb the ladder if you just have the sides. So the constraint here in this analogy is the rung. So if you were to apply this analogy to life, you want to figure out what rungs or constraints you're missing. So a very simple example for this is if you're going to the gym and you want to make progress in your lifts, you could be doing bench press because you love bench press, but that's just building the sides of the ladder. Maybe what is constraining you is your shoulders. Maybe that's what's stopping you from progressing in all of your other lifts. And so that constraint, that rung on the ladder, would be shoulder exercises. You want to do more shoulder exercises so that you can progress and climb up the ladder. And a good question for this, if you want to apply this to other areas of your life, is what is holding me back the most? Like, what is your constraint? So now that we've gone through all the theory, let's actually apply it. You have your essentialism list, right? Go through it, look at the areas of your life that you've put down, and ask yourself, what is holding you back the most? What is that next missing rung on that ladder? I'll give you an example from my personal life. For the longest time, the missing rung for me was stable mental health. Not good mental health that like fluctuates, but like relatively stable good mental health. Because I realized that if my time and energy are capped because my mental health is just garbage, that is going to limit literally everything that I do. Now, if your situation is a bit more difficult because you have a bunch of things you still want to pick and still think are important, or if you have two things that you need to pick between, which is more often than not the case that I go through, I'm gonna give you two tools here which are really closely related to the theory of constraints to help you out in deciding what to focus on. So the first one is picking between pains. Now, this one's pretty simple to understand. There are pains associated with what you're trying to solve, right? The idea here is to identify what those pains are and then just choose one. So I'll give you an example from my life. So a couple months ago, I had to decide between two things to focus on. The first one is what I called my business arc, which is basically trying to figure out how to make money because working a 9-to-5 was killing my soul. And the second one was getting dating experience because I was 25 at the time and I was like, I have little to no relationship experience, and I was like, I want relationship experience. And the pains associated with these is having to go to a job that I really didn't want to go to. Like every day I would wake up and it just wasn't a vibe, or not having relationship experience and the uncertainty that comes with that. And so I decided, for me at the time, I was like, all right, so my work's taking up a lot of my time right now, and it would be great if this was not a thing. Like if I had all this mental space and also this time freed up. So that pain for me was bigger at the time. So I chose to focus on and have my business arc instead of focusing on dating. So I put dating aside because you only pick one thing, you can't have both. And then I focused on that. The second tool that I'll give you is this pick one mindset. And very similar to picking between pains, but you put yourself in this mindset. Like the way you do this is you put yourself in this mindset where you're like, okay, if I could only choose one, what would I choose? So I'll give you an example, because within the context of like business or within these bigger categories that you may have put down in your essentialism list, there are also like sub priorities. So an example from my life is I had to choose between creating a YouTube channel or creating a podcast. Now you can say, oh, those two are similar. They are not. They are not similar things at all. Podcasts are completely different from regular YouTube videos, right? They're longer. I won't go into all the details, but I had to ask myself, I was like, okay, I need to only focus on one thing. What do I choose? And I was like, if you could have like a banger YouTube channel, or if you could have a banger podcast, what would you want? You can only choose one. And you can apply this to other areas of your life. For me, I chose YouTube channel at the time. And now recently I've switched to podcasts because I just enjoy shooting, editing, filming podcasts way more. So those are two tools that I'll give you in your tool belt to actually apply the theory of constraints and pick your one thing. Now on to the next step. But wait, I hear you asking, what about the other parts of your list? All of these areas are important in your life, right? So it's not like you can just ignore this. And this is where I want to introduce the concept of maintenance mode. It's on my list thing. You might have saw it and wondered, what is this? But maintenance mode is basically, what is the bare minimum that I need to do in order to not lose progress in this area? So for example, if it's working out, you don't need to work out 3, 4, 5 times a week. You just need to work out once, maybe twice, to make sure that you don't lose progress in your lifts. Or if you're doing it for mental health purposes, like I was doing it, to make sure that you stay alive and you're actually moving and you're not just staying inside all the time. And it's important to not ignore the other items on your list. One of the things that I can throw out here just from personal experience is mental health, specifically sleep. For me, if sleep goes down, everything else goes down. So I can't just let that slip. It has to stay on maintenance mode. So now that you have your essentialism list, you know how to pick your one thing, and you also know to put the other stuff on maintenance mode. Let's move on to the next step. The next step is, how do you move on? Or how do you switch between the things you want to focus on? So in order to explain this, I'm going to throw down another concept here called seasons. Now you might have heard the term work-life balance. Try to balance everything. That's a myth, because I've tried that from personal experience. I know that's a myth. That's just not how things work, because things in life just change all the time. So the better way to think about balance, and also this section, when to switch focuses, is to think about your life in terms of seasons. This concept of seasons is also the same as the concept of anime arcs. It's a period of time where you've decided to focus on just one thing. So in anime, there's like a training arc. In real life, there's like fall or winter. And in your life, it could be career. There's going to be a season where you are focused just on your career, where you're focused on trying to make money. That's like your career arc. And you'll know when this is over, because when you decide to pick one thing to focus on, there's a reason why you decided to focus on that one thing, right? So for example, for your career arc, it could be get that first job out of university. So you hustle, and then you get your first job, and then you're like, okay, this is good now, I can switch seasons. Or it might be get your first job out of university and know enough about the job to feel confident in what you were doing. So that would be your career arc. And it ends when you're like, okay, you know what? I know enough about this job to know what I'm doing with confidence. So then you switch seasons and you do it all over again. And seasons can be as long as you want or as short as you want. You can have fun seasons. You can have seasons where you just rest and recover. Like if you're sick, you shouldn't be in your business arc. You should switch to a recovery arc. Focus on getting better and then switch back to your business arc or your work arc. When you go on vacation for a month, that's your vacation or rest arc. Seasons or arcs are up to you to define. It can be months, it can be a week, it could be a couple days, but this way of breaking down or segmenting your life has really helped me, because if you're on vacation, all your attention is focused just on your vacation. So you are not going to think about work, because you will tell yourself, you will say, hey, I am choosing to focus on this right now. And it just makes you a lot more present. I'll also throw down another caveat here when I was experimenting with this and trying to understand how this all works. It's that you can change your mind. Going back to that earlier example I mentioned of picking between side hustle stuff versus having relationship experience. After a couple months of just like hustling, I'm like, okay, you know what? This pain of work is actually a lot less significant than I thought. This pain of relationships, like not having relationship experience, is actually a lot bigger than I thought. So I switched. Even though I didn't complete what I wanted to get done during my business arc, I switched to my dating arc. So as you're kind of experimenting with this and playing around with what your priorities are and what you really want to focus on, you can change your mind and choose to switch seasons like halfway. But the high level concept here behind all this is you want to be intentional with what your one focus is. And you want to focus on that, get it done, and then move on to the next season. So recap time. You're super overwhelmed. You have a bunch of different things you want to do, a bunch of different interests, a bunch of different hobbies. What do you choose to focus on? Create your essentialism list, pick one thing to focus on. How you do that is you use the theory of constraints, and two tools you have is to pick between pains or to use the pick one mindset. And then you want to define what you want to achieve. And then after that's done, you change seasons. So that's the recap for the whole thing. When I first learned this, I'm not gonna lie, it was revolutionary to me. I was like, oh my God, I think I've finally found an answer to how to run my life with intention, with purpose, and actually get the things I wanted to get done. And I learned this from a video by Hamza. He's another self-improvement YouTuber. I'll throw the link down in the description if you want to watch his version of it. But this is my version of how to do all this, taking what he mentioned and then throwing a little bit of my spice and my experience on top and telling the whole spiel, the whole structure to you guys. So I'll end the video there. Go run your life the way you want to run it and get things done. I hope you learned something, as always, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.